So Zach, 10 years in the SEAL teams, E6, sniper, free fall jump master, you're running training all over the East Coast. You've made it as a SEAL. You could have done anything you wanted in the SEAL community. Why did you get out, and how did you end up in the technology world?
Yeah, so the decision to get out really did come down from that eureka moment for me, which was like the impact that I'm having is just so much bigger than myself. And my next command hopefully would have been a color, and I would have spent the next 7 or 8 years or longer specialized in a very, very specific skill set. And I just saw like there's a difference, right, on like the impact you can have. And I also looked at my peers who had 10, 12, 15 years ahead of me, and I thought, man, I'm in my prime right now. My story is right, the narrative is here. Let's transition this and turn this into a life of entrepreneurship and scale. It's hard to scale yourself in the military. Jumping into tech, it was pretty straightforward. So I explored, like many of you, consulting. I explored small business ownership and just acquiring a business under 7 million, and the different avenues there. But there's no question that I was most intrigued by people like Bill Gurley from Benchmark and Josh Koppelman and like just these incredible VCs and just how smart they were, and how contrarian they were when they were talking about basic things, like how a stock should IPO or whatever. You just saw these people, man, they see the future. And then I went backwards in time and read all the books from the 90s, right? Like 4 Steps to Epiphany and Crossing a Chasm and the stuff that like the professors that taught people like Eric Rice and Peter Thiel. And then, that gave me the vocabulary I needed to build mentorship around me, and it took off. I mean, a year and a half before I got out of the military, I was on calls with VCs, and I was flying to San Francisco and California and meeting people and doing startup weekends and things to make sure that I understood it. And then I just dove in. And once you dive into the startup scene, it's like, people talk about sunk costs, like there's a sunk cost, you shouldn't actually care because you can go do something else. But there's a level of expertise you can get coming from a military background and going into the startup world where you're used to working with people who are better than you, where like, don't get me wrong, I thought I was a pretty good SEAL, but there was a guy next to me that was just as good or better every step of the way. And when you can come into a place like Startup Landia, which is the crazy town of startup entrepreneurship, and you can come in humbly and say like, hey, these people around me are incredible. I don't know everything. Like, you'd be amazed how far you can go. And so I've learned, I think, in the last 2 years out in the field, I guess, like out 2 years, as of the earlier this month, civilian side, plus a year and a half of mentorship calls before that. I feel like I've surpassed many of my peers in the startup world that have been at it for a decade.